When an officer answers a call from a 3-year-old, he initially assumes it's a joke, thinking, "There's no way this is real." But having learned over years of service never to disregard any emergency, he rushes to the scene. What he discovers there makes his stomach turn. Could it just be a kid's playful imagination? Or is there something far darker at play? Let's find out. And don't forget to tell us where you're tuning in from. The rain relentlessly pounded against Officer Dan Hayes's patrol car, smearing the already faint light of the late October afternoon in Maplewood. It was a quiet, tight-knit town where everyone knew everyone, a place usually calm, but tonight, the stormy downpour gave the air an uneasy tension. Dan, a seasoned officer with 20 years of service, was worn out, his body aching from the bone-deep chill seeping through his uniform despite the heater working overtime. He was eager for his shift to end so he could enjoy a hot meal and the peaceful silence of his home. Just as he began to relax, however, his radio crackled to life. A possible domestic disturbance reported at 123 Elm Avenue. The caller was a 3-year-old boy. Dan frowned, thinking to himself, a 3-year-old calling? It has to be a mistake, or some kid messing around. But there was something in the dispatcher's voice, a combination of disbelief and concern, that triggered Dan's instincts. He couldn't just ignore it. 2 decades of police experience had taught him never to take any call lightly, especially when a child was involved. Flipping on his siren, he drove through the rain-soaked streets of Maplewood, the sound of the siren cutting through the rhythmic pounding of the storm. Elm Avenue, a peaceful residential road, came into view, lined with well-kept homes. Pulling up to 123, he saw the small white bungalow, its flower bed overgrown, and a rusty swing set visible in the backyard. An overturned tricycle lay on the path leading to the front door, sending a chill through Dan as he stepped out into the downpour, the cold rain sticking to his uniform. He approached the front door cautiously, his hand hovering near his holster. From inside, he could hear muffled sounds, a soft whimper, a quiet sob, and a rhythmic thumping that sent a shiver down his spine. Knocking firmly, he projected his voice with authority and reassurance. "Police! Open up." Silence followed, but then a faint, hesitant voice whispered from inside, barely audible over the sound of the rain. "Who is it?" Dan crouched down, bringing himself closer to the door. "It's Officer Dan from the police." "Can you open the door for me?" With a click, the lock turned, and the door creaked open, revealing tear-filled blue eyes staring out. A young boy, no older than 3, stood there clutching a worn teddy bear, his face streaked with dirt and tears. "Are you hurt?" Dan asked gently, his voice softening. The boy shook his head, his lip quivering. "No, but Grandpa fell, and he won't wake up." Dan's heart skipped a beat. This was no prank. Without hesitation, he pushed the door open and entered the house, immediately scanning the room. An elderly man lay unconscious on the floor, his body limp and unmoving. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and something else, something faintly metallic that made Dan's stomach churn. Rushing to the man's side, Dan's trained eyes took in the scene. The man, Mr. Robert Miller, was pale and frail, unconscious, with shallow, labored breathing. Blood had pooled under his head, staining the carpet a dark crimson. Dan's pulse raced as he checked for a pulse, a weak, thready one. Grabbing his radio, he called for help. "Officer needs assistance at 123 Elm Avenue. Possible unconscious male, head injury. Requesting immediate medical backup." The little boy stood quietly by, still clutching his teddy bear, his wide, frightened eyes fixed on Dan. "Is Grandpa going to be okay?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Dan forced a reassuring smile, even though his insides were tight with concern. "We're going to take good care of him, buddy," he said, trying to sound calm despite the urgency of the situation. As paramedics rushed in, moving quickly and efficiently, Dan gently led the boy to the corner of the room, away from the commotion. That's when Dan noticed the landline phone on the nearby table, its receiver hanging off the hook. "Did you call?" Dan asked the boy. The child nodded, his eyes lighting up with a momentary flicker of pride. "Mommy taught me how. She said if something bad happens, I should call and tell them our address and my name." Dan was astonished. This little boy, so young and innocent, had the presence of mind to call for help in the middle of such a terrifying situation. He had potentially saved his grandfather's life. Kneeling down to the boy's level, Dan met his gaze. "You did a very brave thing, kid. You did a great job." The boy sniffled, wiping his nose with the sleeve of his pajamas, leaving a streak of dirt behind. "I just wanted to help Grandpa," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Dan's heart swelled with admiration and protectiveness. "You're a hero, Liam," he said softly. As paramedics worked to stabilize Mr. Miller, Dan sat beside Liam, learning more about the family's situation. Liam lived with his grandfather while his parents were away on a long business trip. Mr. Miller had a history of heart problems and had been feeling weak recently, which led to his fall. Later, as Mr. Miller recovered in the hospital, Dan was struck by a deep sense of responsibility for the boy, a feeling beyond his usual duty as an officer. Driving back to the station, he couldn't shake the thought of Liam's bravery and vulnerability. Should he report the situation to Child Protective Services, CPS? It was a delicate, gray area. Reporting could have serious consequences for the family, but if the child was in danger, Dan sought counsel from his captain, the wise and compassionate Captain Laura Bennett. "This is a tough one," Captain Bennett said after Dan explained. "It's a gray area, but you've got a good heart, Dan. You've got to act if you believe the child is at risk. The system isn't perfect, but sometimes it's the only way to make sure a child is safe." With her support, Dan contacted CPS, detailing his concerns about Liam's well-being and Mr. Miller's declining health. He mentioned how Liam had almost caused a fire in the kitchen when trying to help, which added weight to his concerns. A social worker, Emily Carter, visited the Millers at the hospital and, after careful assessment, confirmed the need for support services. Dan was relieved. He had made the right choice. The Millers, although initially hesitant, were ultimately grateful for the help. As time passed, Dan continued to visit the Millers. He built a bond with Liam, and as the child grew, so did their friendship. Dan found himself teaching Liam how to play baseball, reading him bedtime stories, and sharing moments of joy with the family. Through these visits, Dan discovered a sense of fulfillment he never expected. In Liam, he found not only a young boy who needed guidance, but also a source of light in his own life. One afternoon, while visiting the Millers, Dan noticed a picture of a younger Mr. Miller holding a newborn Liam. It was a photo filled with love and hope, something that reminded Dan of the deep familial bonds that had brought them all together. Despite the challenges, the love between them was undeniable. As Mr. Miller's health improved, he was able to return home. Dan's presence in their lives became more than just that of a police officer. It became a vital part of the family. He helped with chores, spent time with Liam, and became a fixture in their routine. When Liam's parents returned, they were deeply grateful for the bond Dan had formed with their son. He had become a hero in their eyes, someone who had helped their family in a way they could never repay. Dan's life was no longer just about the job. He had found a family, a purpose, and a new sense of direction. And as he sat on the porch one evening, watching Liam chase fireflies and listening to Mr. Miller talk about the past, Dan realized that life had indeed brought him an unexpected gift. A family not bound by blood, but by the love and connection they shared. Have you ever witnessed a small act of bravery that led to life-changing consequences? Let us know your story in the comments below.